Canada's Prime Minister Carney faces tough trade deal with Trump. No deal or worse. In the complex landscape of international relations, the situation between Canada and the United States has taken a notably tense turn. With President Donald Trump back in office, the once amicable relationship between the two nations has been strained by a series of punitive tariffs and provocative remarks, including threats to make Canada the 51st state. In response, Canadian officials have employed a variety of strategies to navigate this challenging environment and seek the removal of these tariffs. Canada's approach has included retaliatory measures, such as imposing tariffs on American goods, as well as periods of restraint, even when faced with increased levies on steel and aluminum. There have been attempts at negotiation, with Canada making concessions only to find Trump responding with threats of further tariffs, often communicated through letters filled with typographical errors. Some officials have openly criticized Trump's trade policies, labeling them as dumb, while others have resorted to flattery, describing him as a transformational leader in hopes of easing tensions. As of Friday, when Trump's new 35% tariffs on certain Canadian products came into effect, the lack of a negotiated agreement by the president's deadline left many wondering how the deadlock might be resolved. Unlike Mexico, which managed to secure a 90-day reprieve from Trump's sweeping import taxes, Canada appears to be facing a more challenging situation. Lori Turnbull, a political scientist at Dalhousie University, noted, "There seems to be a kind of targeting of Canada." She expressed concern that Trump's agreements with other countries, such as Japan and the European Union, did not bode well for Canada, suggesting that the president views Canada differently. Prime Minister Mark Carney, who previously served as a central banker and recently won a federal election by positioning himself as the best candidate to manage U.S.-Canada relations, expressed his disappointment on Friday. He emphasized the need to enhance Canada's economic resilience and diversify its trading partnerships, reducing the country's heavy reliance on the United States, which accounts for over 3/4 of Canadian exports. For Carney, who is still enjoying a political honeymoon, addressing the fractured relationship with Canada's primary trading partner is of utmost importance. However, it remains uncertain whether he will face political repercussions for the failure to secure a deal, or if he will be granted a reprieve. Some business leaders and even political opponents argue that it is preferable for Canada to hold out for a fair agreement, rather than accept a disadvantageous one, as some other G7 nations have done. Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, criticized the tariffs as unjustified and urged Carney to remain firm, insisting that he should not settle for anything less than a complete removal of U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce echoed this sentiment, stating that the Prime Minister is right to prioritize a strong, forward-looking deal over a hasty agreement. Matthew Holmes, the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, reassured that Canada is taking U.S. concerns seriously and is working to address any genuine areas of disagreement. However, he emphasized that Canada is not willing to accept any deal simply to meet a deadline set through a social media post. Trump has implemented multiple rounds of tariffs on Canadian imports, including 25% on automobiles, 50% on steel and aluminum, and 35% on goods not compliant with the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. Previously, the tariff on non-USMCA-compliant goods was set at 25%. Additionally, the U.S. raised duties on softwood lumber last month, with Canada supplying about 80% of U.S. softwood lumber imports. A silver lining for Canada is that a significant portion of its imports are compliant with the USMCA, which helps mitigate the impact of the tariffs. According to data from the U.S. Census Bureau, nearly 60% of U.S. imports from Canada were compliant as of May, a notable increase from 34% in January. Economists estimate that over 90% of Canadian exports could qualify for trade under the USMCA. Although many small and medium-sized businesses had previously opted not to apply for compliance, as their goods were entering the U.S. with minimal tariffs. However, due to the current tariff situation, more businesses are now seeking to qualify for USMCA compliance. The Bank of Canada recently reported that the effective tariff rate on Canadian exports to the U.S. is approximately 5%, which is lower than the rates imposed on most other countries. Nevertheless, the tariffs and the uncertainty surrounding future developments are still weighing heavily on Canada's economy. The sector-specific tariffs have been particularly damaging, with the Bank of Canada noting a slowdown in growth during the second quarter, attributed to a 25% decline in exports following the imposition of Trump's tariffs. Unemployment has risen in sectors dependent on U.S. trade, and the uncertainty surrounding trade has negatively impacted household spending and business investment. During his election campaign, Carney vowed to confront Trump, accusing him of attempting to undermine Canada's sovereignty. However, he has since adopted a more conciliatory tone. Carney appears to have established a better rapport with Trump compared to his predecessor Justin Trudeau, who was often mocked by the president. Trump once referred to Carney as a nice gentleman, but recently shifted his tone, stating that Canada has been very poorly led. Carney had been pursuing an agreement aimed at eliminating the tariffs, but acknowledged that there is little indication that any deal with the U.S. would be free of tariffs. He also suggested that negotiations could extend beyond Trump's Friday deadline. The imposition of tariffs and Trump's threats to use economic force to annex Canada have sparked outrage among Canadians, leading to actions such as removing U.S. alcohol from store shelves and boycotting travel to the U.S. This prolonged boycott is significantly affecting American destinations that rely on Canadian visitors and is reportedly frustrating Trump, according to U.S. officials. The executive order signed by Trump on Thursday, which escalated tariffs on non-USMCA-compliant goods, cited Canada's retaliatory measures and a perceived lack of cooperation in addressing the flow of fentanyl across the border as justifications for the latest round of tariffs. However, data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection indicates that less than 0.2% of all fentanyl seizures at U.S. land borders in the 2024 fiscal year occurred at the northern border. In response to U.S. concerns, Canada announced a $900 million border security plan in December and appointed a fentanyl czar this year. Dan Kelly, head of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, criticized the rationale behind the fentanyl-related tariffs, calling it even more ridiculous than the decision itself. The Trump administration has provided various justifications for the tariffs, including the U.S. trade deficit with Canada, which the president often exaggerates by over $100 billion, and unfounded claims that U.S. banks face operational challenges in Canada. After Trump halted trade discussions over Canada's digital services tax in June, Ottawa rescinded the tax in an effort to salvage negotiations. New Democratic Party leader Don Davies stated, "It's crystal clear that PM Carney's one-sided concessions have been unsuccessful." In a recent interview with Fox Business, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick mentioned Canada's supply management system for dairy as another potential reason for Trump to increase tariffs. This week, Trump also indicated that Canada's intention to recognize Palestinian statehood could complicate trade negotiations, although he later suggested it might not be a deal-breaker. Ontario Premier Doug Ford remarked on Trump's unpredictable nature, stating, "That guy will say something one day and he'll wake up and the cheese slips off the cracker and then all of a sudden he goes the other way." He urged Carney to consider retaliatory measures. Lana Payne, the national president of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union, supported Ford's call for action, asserting, "We have leverage as a country, and we must use it because anyone who thinks the demand for concessions will stop needs to give their head a shake. Holmes, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce executive, cautioned that retaliation could be counterproductive and should be extremely targeted and precision-focused to avoid further harm to Canadian businesses. Trump's sweeping tariffs on Canada and other nations signal a serious intent to reshape the global trading system and reverse a long-standing trend toward freer trade, according to analysts. The pressing question remains: what implications will this have for Canada and Mexico when the USMCA is up for review next year? Turnbull expressed concern that Trump might choose to abandon the deal altogether, stating, "I'm worried that Trump is going to say he doesn't want to do it." This situation raises critical questions about the future of trade relations between Canada and the US. What do you think? Should Canada hold out for a better deal, or is it time to compromise? Share your thoughts in the comments. 5 everyday items that are more expensive in Canada due to tariffs. Imagine waking up one day to find your favorite peanut butter or that sleek fridge you've been eyeing suddenly costing more. This is the reality for many Canadians, thanks to the escalating trade tensions between the United States and Canada. President Donald Trump's decision to hike tariffs on Canadian imports from 25% to 35% has sparked a tit-for-tat response from Canada, affecting a wide range of products. But here's where it gets controversial. While some argue that these tariffs are necessary to protect domestic industries, others see them as a burden on consumers. So what exactly has gotten more expensive in Canada, and how are people coping? Let's dive in. Fridges and washing machines. Canada has slapped retaliatory tariffs on a range of American-made household appliances, including washers, dryers, refrigerators, and HVAC units. These tariffs, combined with the 50% increase on imported metals imposed by the Trump administration, have driven up the prices of these essential items. According to Andreas Schotter, a professor of international business at Western University in Ontario, the cost of refrigerators and freezers has risen by an average of 2%. Dishwashing and laundry appliances saw a 4.5% increase in June compared to the same period last year, as reported by Statistics Canada. However, not all hope is lost. Andrew Barclay, an analyst with Statistics Canada, notes that not all appliances sold in Canada come from the US, giving consumers the option to shop around for better deals. Some retailers have even started offering pre-tariff sales, a subtle hint that prices are likely to rise further. And this is the part most people miss. These sales are a strategic move to clear out inventory before the new prices kick in. New and used cars. The automotive industry has been particularly affected by these tariffs, given the intricate supply chains that span across the US, Canada, and Mexico. A vehicle can cross the borders between these countries up to 8 times before it's fully assembled. The Trump administration's 25% tariff on cars and trucks not built in the U.S. has prompted Canada to impose similar tariffs, though with some exemptions for compliant automakers. The result? New car prices have climbed more than 5% in June compared to the previous year, according to Mr. Barclay. The impact extends to the used car market as well, where prices have also started to rise. Professor Schotter suggests that many Canadians are opting to hold on to their current vehicles longer to avoid the higher costs. Is this a wise move, or are we just delaying the inevitable? Peanut butter, canned soup, and other groceries. Canada's counter-tariffs have hit a variety of U.S.-produced foods, from peanut butter to canned soups. To provide immediate relief to Canadian businesses, some of these tariffs were temporarily suspended for 6 months, starting in April. Despite this, grocery stores are still feeling the pinch. Canada's largest grocer, Loblaw, has introduced a T label to identify items whose prices have increased due to tariffs. Nearly 7,500 products now carry this label, including tomato ketchup, peanut butter, and jam. The impact is evident in the numbers. Fruit juice prices have risen 7.5% from last year due to tariffs on American citrus, and canned soups have seen an 8% increase due to higher steel and aluminum costs. Michael von Massow, a professor of agriculture at Guelph University, explains that Canada relies heavily on the U.S. for food packaging, making it difficult to avoid these price hikes. Chapter 2. The previous user of another space data office. Statistics Canada observed an unusual spike in clothing prices. While Canada has placed counter tariffs on U.S. clothing imports, Mr. Barclay believes the price increases are more a reflection of the broader global trade war, marking a break from the general trend of declining prices over the past 2 decades. What does this mean for the future of fashion in Canada? Will we see a shift towards more domestically produced clothing, or will consumers continue to bear the brunt of these tariffs? Housing and remodeling costs. The home building sector in Canada is bracing for the worst, fearing that the cost of essential materials will soar. Cheryl Shindruck, an executive at a residential development company in southern Ontario, told the Canadian press that the uncertainty has already led to delays in project timelines as companies seek alternative sources for materials. Some items, like layered glass windows, cannot be sourced from non-U.S. markets, leaving builders with no choice but to pay the higher prices. Canada has also imposed tariffs on carpets, flooring, and shingles, leading to a slight increase in the cost of home maintenance and repairs. Plumbing, utilities, and structural steel framing have all seen price hikes, according to Statistics Canada data. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, warned earlier this year that an ongoing trade war could slow economic growth and reduce housing activity, including buying, selling, and construction. Provinces like Ontario, with a significant auto manufacturing sector, are already experiencing an 8% to 26% slowdown in housing starts, according to CMHC data. So, what's your take on these tariffs? Are they a necessary evil to protect domestic industries, or an unnecessary burden on consumers? Share your thoughts in the comments below.